down thy heavenly wisdom from above to direct and guide us in all our consultations. And grant that we, having thy fear always before our eyes, and laying aside all private interests, prejudice, and partial affection, the result of all our counsel may be to the glory of thy blessed name, the maintenance of true religion and justice, the safety, honor, and happiness of the Queen, the public weal, peace, and tranquility of the island, and the uniting and knitting together of the hearts of all persons and estate within the same, in true Christian love and charity, one towards another, through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen.
Be seated. This Honorable House now resumes its sitting. Call of the roll.
Mrs. Holness. Mr. Bartlett. Mr. Holness. Dr. Clark. Dr. Chang. Mr. Montague. Mr. Shaw, Mr. Samuda, Ms. Grange, Mrs. Williams, Mrs. Malawu-Fort, Dr. Tufton, Mr. Mackenzie, Mr. Chuck, Mr. Vaz, Mr. Warmington, Mr. Hutchinson, Mr. Charles, Mr. Green, Mr. Terry Long, Ms. Smith, Mr. Main, Dr. Dunn, Mrs. Cuthbert Flynn, Mr. Morgan, Mr. Davis, Mr. Brown, Dr. Brown-Burke, Dr. Charles, Mr. Chin, Mr. Clark, Mr. Cousins, Ms. Crawford, Ms. Daly, Ms. Davis, Mr. Golding, Mr. Graham, Dr. Guy, Ms. Hamilton, Ms. Hannah, Mr. Henriquez, Mr. Henry, Mr. Hilton, Mr. Jackson, Mr. Lawrence, Ms. Lee, Mr. Miller, Ms. Morrison, Ms. Nita, Mr. Paulwell, Mr. Phillips, Dr. Phillips, Mr. Robertson, Mr. Robinson, Mr. Sibbles, Mr. Slowly, Mrs. Vaz, Dr. Wheatley, Mr. Williams, Mr. Wilson, Mr. Witter, Mr. Wright.
Statements by ministers. Announcements.
Laid on the table of the House today is a copy of the Certified Appropriation Account, head 4600B, Ministry of Culture, Gender, Entertainment and Sport for the year 2015-2016.
Bills brought from the Senate. Petitions.
Petition for private bill. To the Honorable House of Representatives of Jamaica, at Gardner House, 81 Duke Street, Kingston. The humble petition of Sister Susan Fraser, Area Administrator, Religious Sisters of Mercy, Sister Benedict Chung, Corporate Secretary, Religious Sisters of Mercy, and Sister Miriam Cushling, Member, Religious Sister of Mercy, show it that 1. Your petitioners desire to present to this Honorable House of Parliament a private bill entitled An Act to Amend the Sisters of Mercy of Jamaica, British West Indies Incorporation, and Vesting Law 1954. The objects of this bill are to replace the officers which constitute the Sisters of Mercy of Jamaica, British West Indies, which are currently defunct, to make provision for the Sisters of Mercy of Jamaica, British West Indies, to be conferred with powers to govern its management and administration, and to validate and indemnify acts carried out by the Sisters of Mercies of Jamaica, British West Indies, in good faith during the period commencing on the 12th day of April, 1954, and ending on the date of commencement of this act. A copy of the proposed bill has been deposited with the Office of the Clerk of this Parliament with the original of this petition. Notice of this bill has been given by 3 successive publications thereof in its entirety in the Jamaica Gazette dated the 10th date of December 2020, the 17th day of December 2020, and the 24th day of December 2020, respectively. Copies which said gazettes have been affixed to the original of this petition deposited in the Office of the Clerk of this Parliament. Your petitioners have also published a notice containing a statement of the object and reasons of the bill in the Jamaica Gleaner of the 26th day of November 2020. A true copy of the tear sheet of the said Jamaica Gazette, Jamaica Gleaner, has also been affixed to the original of this petition. Your petitioners, to the best of their knowledge, information, and belief, have complied with the parliamentary requirements as set out in the standing order of this Honourable House of Representatives. Wherefore, in the premises, your petitioners do hereby pray for leave to introduce into this Honourable House the bill referred to and mentioned in paragraph 1 above, namely, a bill entitled An Act to Amend the Sisters of Mercy of Jamaica, British West Indies Incorporation, and Vesting Law 1954, and that leave be given to them to proceed. Signed, Sister Susan Fraser, Area Administrator, Religious Sisters of Mercy, Sister Benedict Chong, Secretary, Religious Sisters of Mercy, Sister Miriam Kersling, Member, Religious Sisters of Mercy.
Is it the wish of this House that the promoters be allowed to proceed? Those in favor? Those against? The ayes have it. Papers, reports from committees, notices of motions given orally.
Madam Speaker, I beg to move that at the next meeting of the House, I will move that be it resolved that this Honourable House appoint a special select committee comprising the following members: Most Honourable Juliet Holness, MP, Mr. Franklin Witter, MP, Ms. Rhoda Moy Crawford, MP, Ms. Carencia Morrison, MP, Mr. Philip Henriquez, MP, Mr. Dave Brown, MP, Dr. Angela Brown-Burke, MP, and Ms. Denise Daly, MP, to consider and report on private bills. Madam Speaker, I further beg to give notice that at a later stage today, I will move for the suspension of the standing orders to enable me to take the motion. May it please you, Madam Speaker.
Questions and answers to questions.
Madam Speaker, I beg to give notice at the expiration of 21 days. I will ask the Minister of Health and Wellness the following questions.
Motions that may be made at the commencement of public business requiring notice. Motions relating to sittings of the House. Motions for leave to introduce bills. Presentation of bills without leave of the House first obtained. Public business.
Madam Speaker, I now move for the suspension of the standing orders to enable me to take the motion, notice of which I gave earlier.
The question is that the standing orders be suspended to enable the minister to take the motion, notice of which he gave earlier. Those in favor? Those against? The ayes have it. The question is that the motion, Minister?
Madam Speaker, I beg to move that the motion be approved.
The question is that the motion, notice of which the minister gave notice earlier, be approved. Those in favor? Aye. Those against? The ayes have it.
Madam Speaker, the main item today, of course, the public business will be the opposition spokesman on finance's response to the Minister of Finance presentation last Tuesday. I therefore ask, Madam Speaker, that you invite the honourable member from Southeast St. Andrew to make his contribution.
Madam Speaker, I start my presentation by giving thanks to the Almighty for continuing to bless me with health and strength to carry out my responsibilities in this House. I am forever grateful to the constituents of Southeast St. Andrew who have sent me here for the third time to continue to represent their interests. And I will do so with integrity, dignity, and accountability. The constituency has a dedicated team of workers led by Councillor Andrew Swaby, Councillor candidate Jesse James Clark, our long-standing Secretary Ivy Hills, our organizer Sonia Forbes, and a host of others who work behind the scenes giving yeoman service and in most cases unrecognized. I wish to thank them. I also want to thank my close protection officer and driver for their work and commitment. Madam Speaker, I wish to acknowledge and thank our new party president and opposition leader, Mark Golding, for entrusting me with this responsibility, and to my colleagues, both here in the House and in the party, for their continued guidance and support. I also want to acknowledge, and I expect him to be here, our former opposition leader, Dr. Peter Phillips, who started what you refer to as the good policies when he was Minister of Finance in 2012 and has laid the foundation for the economic stability that the country currently enjoys. And finally, and by no means least, Madam Speaker, I want to thank my wife and children who endure with me and the rest of my family who unconditionally support what I do and always have my back in all my endeavors. Madam Speaker, these are challenging and unprecedented times for Jamaica and the world. We understand the context in which the budget for fiscal year 21-22 has been developed, having seen how the last budget had to adapt to face our realities. However, Madam Speaker, we are concerned that the current budget will not adequately address the economic fallout and the rising inequalities that have worsened since the onset of COVID a year ago. My colleague from the other side of the aisle spoke on Tuesday about policy. Good policy does matter. That is something that we agree with. But on this side, we have always held that people matter and that any good policy must be crafted with people at the center of it. Any analysis of the budget, Madam Speaker, must be placed within two defining and, in this case, contrasting contexts. On the one hand is our vision for Jamaica, and on the other, the realities that we face here, particularly over the last 5 years, with even further emphasis on the last year, and how the government has responded. Let me begin with a brief statement about that vision. Our dream is a Jamaica where people not only feel safe, but are safe. A Jamaica with a growing economy, which is providing high-quality jobs and producing products and services in high demand locally and globally. A Jamaica in which young and old have access to quality primary and secondary health care, including adequate nutrition. A Jamaica where our children have access to a first-class education system from early childhood to university. That is what Vision 2030 promises, a Jamaica where we can live, work, raise our families, and do business. But, Madam Speaker, what is the reality? In the last 5 years, from 2016 to 2020, there were almost 7,000 reported murders. The exact number is 6,918. This figure is 23% higher than for the previous 5 years, from 2011 to 2015, where we had 5,619 murders. In the last 3 years, from 2018 to 2020, we had 3,927 murders, or almost 60% of that total. And these murders took place despite having over 12 states of emergencies, 4 ZOSAs for almost 3 years, and despite spending billions of dollars in this effort. For the monies that we have spent, Madam Speaker, the results are unfortunately going in the wrong direction. Madam Speaker, there was no mention of this in the minister's 3.5-hour presentation on Tuesday, although there is a direct correlation between reducing crime and achieving higher levels of economic growth. The number of murders since the beginning of this year, 2021, have outstripped 2020 to date. And sadly to say, Madam Speaker, Jamaica currently ranks as the most murderous place in the entire Caribbean and Latin America region, with an average of 46.5 murders per 100,000 persons. So the reality, Madam Speaker, we are not safe as a people. Madam Speaker, and we certainly can't sleep with the windows and doors open. Madam Speaker, every country has been affected by the novel coronavirus, but the pace of recovery will depend on the strength of the economies pre-COVID. The data shows that the Jamaican economy has been in decline since 2019, contrary to the impression the government wishes to create. The country suffered 3 consecutive quarters of negative economic growth, starting in July 2019 to March 2020, when the first case of COVID was reported. During this period, the decline quarter over quarter worsened. If you look at the chart that I've just put on the screen, starting from the quarter of July to September 2019, negative growth of 0.2%. From October to December 2019, negative growth of 0.5%. And from January to March 2019-2020, negative growth of 1.7%. So, Madam Speaker, after a lackluster performance in 2018-2019, with less than 1% growth in each quarter, our economy began to shrink in the second quarter of 2019-20 and has continued on a downward trajectory since. So when the pandemic hit us in March 2020, we were already in economic decline. We were actually 1 quarter away from being classified as being in a recession prior to COVID. So prior to COVID, our GDP had declined from $15.71 billion in 2018 to $15.46 billion in 2019. The Jamaican people, Madam Speaker, are the ones who have been feeling this decline. Since the onset of COVID, things have gotten worse. Today, many people are out of work or jobless. The little hustle that them did have mash up. Some have been without a steady income for a year. People are finding it hard to feed themselves and their families. And in addition to the job losses, the school closures have also made it more difficult. Madam Speaker, the reality is that many Jamaicans are simply hungry. Hungry, Madam Speaker. A recent study by UNICEF Jamaica and CAPRI showed that 45% of households have had to cut back on food because they simply cannot afford it. Most of these households are coping with the food shortages by eating smaller amounts or eating fewer meals per day. It doesn't help our situation, Madam Speaker, that since 2016, the cost of basic food items have skyrocketed. The cost of saltfish, cooking oil, chicken back, and rice, as examples, have increased by over 100%. And Madam Speaker, I want to show you what we mean by the food insecurity. Prime Minister never bring the basket. Never bring the basket. But I want to show you the price increases. Chicken back, $60 in 2016 is now $140, an increase of 133%. Cooking oil, $85 in 2016 is now $220, an increase of 158%. Tin mackerel has moved from $55 to $100, an increase of 81%. Rice has gone up from $31 per pound to $62 per pound, an increase of 100%. And sugar has gone up from $55 per pound to $121, an increase of 120%. So, Madam Speaker, this is the reality that Jamaican people are facing. So when we talk about food poverty, this is their reality. These are basic food items which all Jamaicans must consume. Madam Speaker, even more ominous is that there's an expectation that food prices are going to increase, as the president of the Jamaica Manufacturers and Exporters Association said. Another study, Madam Speaker, this one from the United States Department of Agriculture, from their Economic Research Service, entitled International Food Security Assessment 2020 to 2030, COVID updates and impacts on food insecurity. In a report that was released in January 2021, that's 2 months ago, reveals that 12.8% of the Jamaican population is what they classify as food insecure. This is double their own projections of what existed prior to COVID. So, Madam Speaker, food insecurity means that we have 400,000 Jamaicans who cannot afford to eat what is defined as the minimum amount of food on a daily basis. It's not my data. This is data done by the can you show the slide? By the United States Department of Agriculture. What the data shows, if you look at Jamaica, is that Jamaica had the single largest increase in food insecurity in the entire region, meaning we had a 100% increase pre-COVID to post-COVID. No other country in the region, not even Haiti, had that increase. So, Madam Speaker, the data is supporting what all of us in this House know, because we have to deal with it with our constituents. And the reality is that there are a large number of Jamaicans who simply cannot afford to buy the minimum amount of food to survive on a daily basis. In their book, Poor Economics, Nobel Prize winners Banerjee and Duflo, who were economists from MIT, made a link between caloric intake and productivity. The concept is called the nutrition-based poverty trap and dates back to 1958. And I quote from their publication. The idea is simple. The human body needs a certain number of calories just to survive. So when someone is very poor, all the food he or she can afford is barely enough to allow for going through the motions of living and perhaps earning the meager income that the individual originally used to buy that food. Madam Speaker, food builds strength, which allows people to be productive and to earn. Madam Speaker, I want to share a story with you about Patsy. Patsy is a vendor outside a primary school gate in my constituency. She has been operating there for the last 10 years. She has used this income to support herself and her family. Since March last year, when schools closed, Patsy has had no income whatsoever. Like many Jamaicans, Patsy, unfortunately, doesn't have any savings. She doesn't have any health insurance. She doesn't have a pension. And she was not a beneficiary of the COVID care grant last year. She's actually diabetic and is suffering from diminishing eyesight. Patsy survives because she has a friend who provides food for her. But the reality, Patsy is not waiting on a handout. She has lived her life being an industrious member of this society. But she has very little option because since schools have closed, she has had no income. Madam Speaker, we must help the Patsies and the many others who are hurting and are in need. While we know the government has allocated funds to support the most vulnerable in this budget, what is being proposed is woefully inadequate. People matter, Madam Speaker, and good policy must have people's interests at the heart of it. Madam Speaker, the pandemic has also placed a strain on our health services, and the risk to an already overburdened and underfunded system cannot be greater. I want to use this opportunity on behalf of the opposition to thank our doctors, our nurses, and all the healthcare professionals on the front line who continue to go beyond the call of duty to serve the public. And when we speak about healthcare professionals, we immediately think of the doctors and the nurses. But I also want to recognize the unsung heroes. They are the orderlies, the janitors, the lab techs, the pharmacists, all of these professionals who make up this ecosystem, and the many other selfless Jamaicans who serve at great sacrifice to themselves, to their personal health and their well-being to serve us. Last week, Madam Speaker, 3 nurses passed away from COVID, and to their grieving families and all the other families who have lost loved ones, we want to offer our condolences in their time of grief and mourning. For many Jamaicans, the daily reports of COVID cases, coupled with the stories of our brothers and sisters being turned away or passing away in hospital that are under-resourced, are heartbreaking and increase anxiety. Our healthcare workers are giving their all, but they need support. Our hospitals need more resources. This situation was not caused by COVID. However, Madam Speaker, since COVID, the reality is that health poverty and health insecurity in Jamaica have worsened. The effects of the pandemic will last for a long time to come, given the number of children who are unable to access online education. And particularly in the rural areas, the percentages of students who can't access are extremely high, sometimes up to 80%. This issue must become a priority. If not, poverty will become even more chronic. The reality, Madam Speaker, is that inequality and poverty widen the education gap. We know this very well in Jamaica. The gap between the haves and the have-nots is just too wide, and how this vicious cycle is perpetuated. Within our Jamaican reality, it is clear that something major has to be done to address the issues that concern us. The issues of safety and security, the issues of economic growth, the issues of access to quality health care, and the issues of access to education. Madam Speaker, in our view, the budget presented on Tuesday did not go far enough to address these issues. Madam Speaker, I now want to turn to the budget. The budget has been cast based on a projection of oil prices at $45.6 per barrel. Currently, as of today, oil prices are trading at $68 per barrel and are projected to increase even further. While the recent oil price volatility has been triggered by specific events in the U.S., like the Texas freeze, the market expects oil prices to rise as the global economy recovers from COVID. Economic recovery will trigger a greater demand for oil as travel and other commercial activities increase. In 2015, in the last PNP administration, a special tariff was introduced for the implementation of a hedge against high oil prices. While that tariff remains in place and is being collected, there is no hedge. Madam Speaker, the implementation of a hedge would have made sense last year when oil prices were at record low levels. And in fact, the opposition leader at the time made a recommendation and a call for this. At this stage, Madam Speaker, it wouldn't make sense. In our language, the horse gone through the gate at this point in time. We have had 14 consecutive weeks of gas price increases, and every time there's a gas price increase, the cost of living goes up for both private citizens and businesses, but also for the government. Madam Speaker, within this context, I want to ask the Minister of Finance some questions. What contingencies exist in the budget if oil prices continue to rise at the rate they are, when we have projected a $45 per barrel, and we are now, at this point, more than $20 above that? What impact is this going to have on our current and fiscal accounts? What impact will this have, for example, on already loss-making entities like the JUTC that has to buy a lot of fuel and can't pass on those costs to the end user, on the NWC, for whom the largest part of their cost is the electricity to pump and generate water? Those entities are already a drain on the budget. What is going to happen as we anticipate oil prices continuing to rise? What impact it is going to have on consumer gas prices at the pump, which will continue to increase and reduce the disposable income that consumers have to spend on other things. And the increase in gas prices have a multiplier effect throughout the economy. Goods and services, goods in particular, have to be transported. The transport cost is going to go up. So I anticipate in very short order, notwithstanding what the JMEA president may have been referring to as global conditions, I anticipate that the 14 weeks of gas price increases, we will see very shortly even more increases to these prices that currently exist. That is the reality that we face, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I raise this issue at Standing Finance. How does the government intend to clear the arrears owed to contractors and suppliers beyond the $2 billion extra allocation in the budget, when the figures presented accounted for $6 billion in terms of what is currently owed? And Madam Speaker, the budget projects tax revenues to grow by 12.5% to $572 billion. Okay, so it's total. Madam Speaker, these seem fairly aggressive numbers that the minister is projecting. And hopeful. And the reality is that we hope we can achieve these numbers. But within a context where you have increase in prices, where consumers don't have a choice about these items, they don't have a choice necessarily about whether they purchase gas or not, are the assumptions that drive these projections solid at this stage? We also intend to achieve herd immunity by March next year, a year from now. Now, are we on track in terms of the rollout of the vaccine to ensure that the economy can grow at the rate to provide the revenues that you're projecting? Madam Speaker, we have concerns about these targets, and we have concerns that we may have to come back and have supplementary budgets, the government. Madam Speaker, I want to turn now to the impact that COVID has had on women. I gave a story about Patsy, the school vendor who sells at a primary school in my constituency. But the reality is Patsy is not alone. There are thousands of Patsys in Jamaica. And the economic and social fallout from COVID has disproportionately affected women. The unemployment rate for women in October 2020 was 13%, and the figures are there in the chart in front of you. 13% for women versus 8.6% for men. And even more alarming, the increase in the unemployment rate from 2019 to 2020. For women, it moved by 51%. So it moved from 8.6% in 2019 to 13% in 2020. For the men, it moved from 6% to 8.6%. So not only do we have a higher rate of unemployment among women, we also had a greater increase in the unemployment rate over the year for women. There is also, Madam Speaker, a larger percentage of women who operate outside the formal labor force than men. And therefore, they have been more affected by the economic fallout. So again, if you look at the chart in front of you, and I took the population of 14 and over, we have just over 1 million men, and outside the labor force, 321,000, approximately 31%. Just over 1 million women, outside the labor force, 470,000, a ratio of 44%. And many of these women have had to either give up their jobs and their opportunities for earning to stay home with the children who are now forced to do online school. So the reality, Madam Speaker, is that while COVID has affected everybody, our women have borne the brunt of the effect. And Madam Speaker, when I come to my recommendations, I'll share some ideas on how this can be addressed. Madam Speaker, I want to now look at how countries have responded to the COVID crisis. We are in an unprecedented health and economic crisis, but Jamaica is not unique. The table that is in front of you shows how countries across the world have responded to the COVID-19 crisis through fiscal measures. And I'll just explain what the table is. To your left, you will see advanced economies, and it shows the percentage of GDP as a response by countries to the COVID measures, to the COVID crisis. So advanced economies, on average, have spent 20.3% of GDP responding to the crisis. Emerging markets and middle-income countries have spent, on average, 5.9% of GDP responding to the crisis. And low-income developing economies have spent 1.8% of GDP responding to the crisis. Madam Speaker, Jamaica is categorized as a middle-income country based on our GDP per capita of US $5,320. And if you compare what Jamaica has spent as a percentage of GDP responding to COVID, is 1.67% that Jamaica has spent when the average has been 5.9% globally. Madam Speaker, if I narrow the analysis and go to the Caribbean region to look at how our neighbors in the Caribbean region have responded. And just for clarity here, I broke out the figures to look at the direct response to households and to firms, because those are the persons most affected by the COVID crisis. As a percentage of GDP, Jamaica spent 1.27% of GDP responding to the crisis. Barbados spent 7.9%. Suriname, 6%. The OECS countries, what we tend to refer to as the small islands, they average between 3.8 to 11%, an average of about 6%. So, Madam Speaker, when you look at the response of Jamaica vis-a-vis our comparable countries in the Caribbean, we are at the bottom. And Madam Speaker, it shouldn't be surprising. It shouldn't be surprising when you look at the levels of food insecurity. It shouldn't be surprising when you look at the level of poverty. So a country like Barbados has spent more than 6% more responding to COVID and in direct support to households and businesses than Jamaica has. Now, Madam Speaker, I have spent the time going through the data because I believe it is important to show why we must do more to protect the most vulnerable and position ourselves for growth. And we must do more because people matter and good policy must have people at the heart of it. Madam Speaker, for the upcoming financial year 21-22, the government has allocated $8 billion for support for individuals and $5 billion for support for businesses, which amounts to 0.6% of the projected 2021-2022 GDP figure. Madam Speaker, it is woefully inadequate. Madam Speaker, I want to turn to addressing and looking at the digital divide in education.
All those other numbers are just thrown into the basket.
No, Madam Speaker. I am looking at the direct response to COVID. There are expenditures which the government undertakes normally. There are infrastructure expenditures, there are normal path expenditures. Those things are what governments do every year. I am dealing with the specific COVID response. And this data is not my data. It's the IDB publication, November last year. So I know the minister has grouped all the expenditures underserved, and it is 60 billion. So we have infrastructure, we have broadband, we have a number of things. But when you strip it out to look specifically now at the support to individuals and households, it is 0.6% of GDP. Madam Speaker, I want to look at the digital divide in education, because the way out of poverty for the majority of Jamaicans is through education. From June last year in this House, 3 months into the pandemic, I made a recommendation that we should remove the GCT on computers and tablet devices, since it was clear from then that students would be required to do school online and would need cheaper access to these devices. Madam Speaker, 9 months later, nothing has been done. We are about to start a new fiscal year, and this would have been an opportune time to make this adjustment. And while our population will be vaccinated, and the ministry, we hope we'll get the vaccines that are projected, and we hope we can get to herd immunity by March next year. The reality is that there's going to be a lag in time before we can resume face-to-face classes fully. That's a reality. based on the vaccination schedule. So, Madam Speaker, our children are going to be required to engage in online classes at least for some time to come. But, Madam Speaker, we didn't get to this place just because of COVID. The digital divide has been made worse by this government because over the period of the last term, for the 4.5 years from March 2016 to September 2020, we did not deliver one new device to a student in our public school system. Not one. So yes, COVID has made it worse. But if we had at least had started what Member Paul had started in 2014 and gotten those devices out, when COVID had hit us, we wouldn't be starting from zero. So, Madam Speaker, yes, in September, 40,000 tablets have been delivered to part students. The ministry has started distributing the 36,000 vouchers. But, Madam Speaker, there is still a huge gap between what the government is doing, what our private sector partners are doing, and I want to use this opportunity to thank the private sector partners who have come on board and are supporting the one tablet per child program. But, Madam Speaker, the JTA president last week estimated that 40%, and these estimates will vary, my own view it might be higher, that 40% of the students in our public school system have no device. Now we have 600,000, approximately 600,000 students. So we are saying 240,000 students have no access to a tablet or a computer. Madam Speaker, these students are being left behind. They are being left behind. Madam Speaker, the effect of not having our students access online education is dire. Already, some schools are reporting that some students are not going to return to the classroom. Some of them have been forced to take on a little job, a little hustle, so them can earn, and some of them have just dropped out fully. And so, Madam Speaker, the implications of these are grave. We may see increased teenage pregnancies for our girls, and we may see, and it's a reality, and we're going to see more of our young boys getting involved in antisocial and ultimately criminal activity. That is the reality of the crisis that we face and why we must address the digital divide in education as a priority. Madam Speaker, yes, Prime Minister, I don't know if you authorized this, but I got this letter upside down in my email. And I think it was deliberately upside down because it's upside down logic. The letter says, having committed to providing from the Universal Service Fund. I'll show you a copy. No, I know it's not you. I know it's not you, but ultimately the buck stops with you. So whether it's your ministry or not, and I'm going to come to you, Prime Minister. The USF had committed to provide, ask each member of parliament, and I don't know if it's only we get the letter. No, I hope all MPs have got the letter, not just us. But, Madam Speaker, we were asked to identify, well, that's why I asked the question, if it's only we get the letter. Okay. Madam Speaker, we were asked to identify 3 locations in our constituency that we could implement a Wi-Fi hotspot solution. Now, why is that important? Beyond connecting the schools, while the kids are at home, where they don't have access to data, they can go to the community center and get the free Wi-Fi. Now, we just got this letter to say that based on a cut in the USF budget, they can't do the 3. They can only do 2.
A third less.
Now, Madam Speaker, in a time of crisis where so many of our students don't have access to online education, how can we choose to cut something like this? How can we cut this? Now, let me work out what it means in dollars and cents, because the USF is now asking each MP to find $2.5 million to fund the third one. And if you have the money, you can do more. By the 63 of us, that works out to be about 160. Well, I don't know if it's 63. Maybe it's us. I don't know.
I think it's upside down.
But it's upside down logic. That for $160 million, we would not provide access for poor kids to get online and access online education. This is wrong. And we can't say we can't find the money.
Where's the board policy in that?
We can't say we can't find the money. Madam Speaker, this cannot make sense in this crisis. That we are cutting back. Having made a commitment in January.
January, no?
This letter, the first letter was sent in January, and now less than 2 months later, we are cutting back on the commitment. I mean, I went and gave my 3 locations, and I hope my locations are going to be honored. Why? Because the people in those communities need access to the internet. Their children can't buy the data every day to stay in the Zoom class online. How can this is upside down logic, Madam Speaker? In the same way it came into my email box upside down, is upside down thinking.
But it shows your fiscal numbers because
January came in January, and the letter came, the original in January, March 4th. Madam Speaker, the data provided by the Ministry of Finance indicates that the government collected approximately $625 million in GCT for the fiscal year 2019-20 and about $1 billion in GCT for the year 2021 on computer, tablets, and devices. 2021 would be higher because once we got into the pandemic, more and more people would have been buying tablets and devices. So the loss in revenue, if the government was to remove the GCT, would be somewhere between, you could call it 800 million, if you go to the maximum, $1 billion. If you take that figure, Madam Speaker, as a percentage of the government's budget by the third supplemental, which was tabled earlier this year, of $576 billion, it would represent 0.17 of 1% of government's total revenues. Not 17%, 0.17 of 1% that we would be giving them. So, Madam Speaker, the question we have to ask is not whether we can afford to give up this revenue, because we can. The question is whether we can afford to continue.
Madam Speaker, I beg to move that the member's time be extended to allow him to complete his presentation.
Those in favor? Those against? The ayes have it.
Madam Speaker, the question is not whether we can give up this revenue, because we can. The question is whether we can afford to continue to have so many of our students miss out on an education because they cannot afford to purchase a computer or a tablet. This trade-off, in my view, is a no-brainer. The way out of poverty for the majority of us as Jamaicans is through education. By investing in education, we're going to get the dividends down the road. Madam Speaker, we can do better, and we must do better. And in addition, Madam Speaker, to reducing the digital divide, the use of computers and more technology increases productivity and positions ourselves positively to become a participant in this new digital economy. Madam Speaker, I want to tell you about Yvonne. Yvonne is a household helper. She shares her cell phone with her 2 grandchildren. She, like most Jamaicans, buys credit on a regular basis to top up. So the reality, Madam Speaker, is that there are days when her children can be online, and then there are days when they can't, because they can't be on the Zoom all the time. Sadly for Yvonne, she lost some of her days' work because one of our employers was laid off and cut back on the number of days. So Yvonne is using the one cell phone, which she has to buy credit for, to ensure her 2 grandchildren have access to online education. Fortunately for her, one of the employers purchased a tablet for one of the grandchildren. And there are generous Jamaicans, and I want to thank them, who have stepped up and provided that for persons who are in need. But, Madam Speaker, Yvonne's grandchildren need a solution. Yvonne's grandchildren need a tablet without the GCT so that they can afford it. And notwithstanding what is being done by the government, we are still going to be left with a huge gap in terms of the number of students who have access to these devices. Madam Speaker, Yvonne's situation is a result of policy. It's policy. Policy to maintain the GCT on these devices. I am not the only one who has called for it. Almost every private sector entity has also joined the call. The JTA, every other entity. And I can't understand, Madam Speaker, having made this call. I made it in July right here in the House. Initially, I said for a specific period because we had just got into the pandemic. If we had done it from then, we would have had far more of these devices in the hands of our kids right now. So, Madam Speaker, I want to encourage the government in examining their policy on the GCT on these devices. That people matter, and that good policy must have people at the center of it. Madam Speaker, solving the device problem is only one part of the access to education equation. We also need to address the internet access problem. And again, I will acknowledge that the government has done some work since the pandemic in connecting more of our schools to the internet, but there's a lot more that needs to be done, and a lot more that needs to be done quickly. Madam Speaker, we are now in March with one school term left for this academic year before the school term closes for summer. There are students who have missed an entire year of school because they do not, either they don't have the device or they don't have internet access. And the colleagues in here who are in the rural areas will tell you it is worse in the rural areas than it is in the urban centers. Madam Speaker, we must set as an objective to ensure that all our schools are connected to broadband by the beginning of the next school term in September. It has to be an objective. It has to be a focus. I know work is being done, and I acknowledge that. But more resources, more attention is needed on this issue to ensure that when we get to the next school term, if we are still not in a position to have face-to-face, that the children can access education online. Madam Speaker, I now want to turn to an issue of housing and how we can build more houses for those who are at the base of our pyramid. The housing sector, Madam Speaker, has seen significant growth in the last number of years and is one of the few that has remained resilient during this pandemic. The challenge, however, with the housing market is that while the market has been able to provide solutions at the mid-level going up, there is a significant deficit in solutions at the lower income levels. There is therefore a market imbalance where lower income solutions are concerned. And the government has a responsibility, Madam Speaker, to correct and deal with this market imbalance. Beyond the socioeconomic benefits of home ownership, there is also the fundamental issue of equity. It is manifestly unfair for NHT contributors to be legally obligated to contribute, yet they are effectively crowded out of the market because, one, they are not able to afford a home, and secondly, they are effectively subsidizing home ownership for those with higher incomes. Yeah. That is the reality that we face. That is the reality. So, for many, the NHT is merely a tax from which they yield no benefit, which is not the way it was envisioned by our former Prime Minister, Michael Manley, when he established the NHT. That's not what the NHT was set up to do. And Madam Speaker, all of us understand partner business. If you throw a partner, you must get a draw. You can't partner. If you throw a partner, you must get a draw. And you throw a hand, you must get a draw. And so what you have now is that people not voluntarily throwing a hand, they have to throw the hand, but them can't get no draw. And they are subsidizing those who are earning more than them. Something wrong with that. And I'm dealing with this, Madam Speaker, because the NHT projects to spend $57 billion. $57 billion in this fiscal year on housing solutions. And a significant majority of those who may qualify for home ownership simply can't afford it because they can't service a mortgage of $5 million or over, based on their income levels. And the reality is, we know income levels have not kept up pace with the other costs related to housing development. But despite efforts made by your administration, efforts made by our administration, to make home ownership easier and more affordable, there is still a huge gap between the effective demand of about 200,000 persons who would want to purchase a home in the $7 million price range and the supply of these units. And developers, for good reason, have shied away from this market because they can make more money by building to the medium and the upper end of the market. So we essentially have a supply side issue. And that supply side issue is driven by the relative high cost and the lack of availability of land for this kind of development, the high infrastructure costs on these greenfield sites, the lengthy and protracted time processes for approval, and the fluctuations in costs. Imported costs represent between 60 and 70%. But Madam Speaker, we have to find a solution to this. The NHT was created to provide access to those who otherwise would not have been able to afford to buy a house. And solving this problem, Madam Speaker, requires very deliberate and proactive policy on the part of the government. Deliberate and proactive policy to deal with the parameters that will make it more attractive for a developer to want to build houses below the $10 million level. Below that level. Now, there are examples, and you know the examples of one or two developers who are working with the NHT. But it can be something that happened by chance, or you buck upon it, or ad hocly. It has to be an imperative to get more developers to build at the lower end. And there's a way to do it. And you have the examples, you have seen what works and what doesn't work. There are issues around the lengthy time processes for approvals, which can take 18 to 24 months. There are issues around the availability of land, and when you're doing low-income housing, you're talking about a minimum of 300 units going into the thousands. So you have to have land that is available. There are issues around the infrastructure costs related to this land. But we have the NHT spending $57 billion in this financial year. So we have to find a solution to this problem to ensure that more Jamaicans who want to buy a home can afford these solutions. Madam Speaker, the Minister said policy is important, and we must never forget that policy is impacted by people. And people matter, and the policy is only good if it has people at the center of it, Madam Speaker. This is not something which is an insurmountable challenge. It requires a will and determination to tackle it as a priority. And more than anything, Madam Speaker, equity demands that we do something about this. Equity. Equity demands that we do something about it. Madam Speaker, I want to turn to look at what I consider the economic first responders in Jamaica. Up to March last year, Jamaica had a large number of small businesses operating across the island. The small, micro, and medium-sized enterprises are the major employers of the poor, the unskilled, and the foremost growth drivers in our country. Much like other developed countries, they have also borne the brunt of this pandemic. These enterprises are what we call economic first responders. And a government that protects these businesses is also protecting the jobs of the poor and the working class. We define these businesses as economic first responders because these are the businesses that the most vulnerable in our society go to first when they get their money on a Friday evening. It might be the shopkeeper. It might be the vendor. It might be, for the ladies, the person who do the hair and the nails. It may be the pan chicken man. These micro businesses that run from 1 to 5 persons are the backbone of our economy. The Small Business Association of Jamaica estimates that 30% of these businesses have closed since the beginning of the pandemic. And it's not hard data, it's an estimate. My own view, it may be more in some areas, it may be less, but that is still a significant amount. Our economic first responders, Madam Speaker, need what I would call an urgent capital vaccination to keep them going. If Jamaica was to lose the majority of these micro businesses, our economy would contract even further, and it would take a much longer time to recover. Madam Speaker, we must find a way to extend a lifeline to these economic responders, and the government has to do more to deal with these entities. Madam Speaker, I want to look at how Jamaica needs to prepare itself for a post-COVID world. COVID-19 has been transformational in that many of the jobs that have been lost during the pandemic will not return. There's been a shift from the reliance on physical locations, physical transactions, to becoming more digitally agile. This scenario presents 2 sets of challenges for our country. Internally, there will be more services delivered online, which will force those persons who are technology challenged to come up into the digital age. Secondly, for Jamaica, to maintain its competitiveness globally, we must have a well-educated, technologically savvy population. There's a lot of data, Madam Speaker, which shows that increasing your broadband penetration by 10% can lead to a 1.2% increase in GDP per capita. So, Madam Speaker, when we are calling for an increase in the investment to roll out broadband, it's not just about reducing the digital divide, it is a strategy to facilitate economic growth. So when we got this upside down letter, Madam Speaker, it means we are going in the wrong direction. We are already cutting back on expanding Wi-Fi access for the poor, and that will further curtail economic growth. Madam Speaker, I am again aware of what the government is doing in terms of broadband access, but more has to be done, and more has to be done more quickly. We have a secret, I don't want to call it a secret asset, but not many people know about the underground NWA fiber optic cables. And I know what is being done. I know. And when we were there, we knew. But it requires more, far more, to connect the schools and to go beyond the schools to connect in the communities, to ensure that a young Jamaican who is at home can go to a community center in his community and log on to online school. So yes, I know what is being done, Prime Minister, but we need more money in the broadband rollout, not just for the schools, but you're cutting back already. You're cutting back already. Cutting back already. So, Madam Speaker, we're calling for the government to do more for broadband, not just for the digital divide, but as an economic growth strategy. You know, Madam Speaker, I want to share a story with you. A young lady came to me and she had a concern. She had gotten a job in the US and wanted to find out whether she needed to get a visa and her social security number. And then I started talking to her. And I realized that she had gotten a job, staying here, working online with a US company. And she went through all the processes, and she was actually formally employed. And I said to myself, how many other young Jamaicans who may be looking for an opportunity here in Jamaica, but because of the contraction in the economy, can't find a job here? If they have access to high-speed broadband, they can position themselves to get jobs anywhere in the world. Anywhere in the world. As we know, when we look at the BPO sector, the expansion, and it may create some other issues with taxes, but many of them are working at home. And they are employing more and more people who are working at home. And so it's a growth opportunity, notwithstanding whatever the tax challenges may be. But, Madam Speaker, the investment in broadband is an economic growth strategy. So we can't be cutting back if we want to grow the economy. But, Madam Speaker, as absolutely necessary as it is, the provision of devices and internet access represent only one part of the mix. Government's response, which has to be proactive, must be multi-pronged and holistic. And I'm therefore calling for the implementation of a digital literacy program at the national level. A digital literacy program. Madam Speaker, in the digital economy, data has become the new source of wealth. Data literacy, the ability to collect, organize, manage, evaluate, and apply data to various businesses and activities, is rapidly becoming an essential, in-demand employability skill. Digital literacy and data skills are no longer optional. They are no longer something that is the preserve of the privilege. They are essential and critical to social inclusion. Given the government's own plans to pilot the digital currency and to amend the BOJ Act to facilitate financial inclusion, this is even of more importance and an imperative right now. Our first responders, the economic first responders that I mentioned before, Madam Speaker, they are important players in the rollout of this effort to ensure that we have a digital economy. Madam Speaker, I want to turn now to look at the area of agriculture. It's an area that we have spoken about for many years. And whether we like it or not, feeding ourselves has to be a priority as countries struggle to protect their own products. If there was ever a time to boost local production, to support our small farmers, and to ramp up market share in the region and beyond, the time is now. Foreign direct investments are under pressure as fewer investors are willing to extend their obligations in times of uncertainty and in countries where there are major crime and corruption concerns. Madam Speaker, I want to tell you a story about Anthony. Anthony, not that Anthony, the Governor General, but Anthony, a young small farmer, not that one. No, not that one. he would be Sir Anthony. Madam Speaker, Anthony is a young small farmer in the hills of southwest St. Anne, just above Cape Valley. For every year, for a 5-month period between December and April, there is little or no rain where he operates. For years, he has been trying to establish a reliable source of water for his farm so that he can farm all year round. So during those 5 months, he has to sit and wait and hope for rain. Anthony, Madam Speaker, is one of thousands of small farmers who, because they don't have access to irrigation, cannot produce their crops all year round, and as such, are operating in a suboptimal way. Madam Speaker, we're calling for the implementation of a program which will get irrigation, particularly to our small farmers, particularly to the small ones. We know there are large-scale irrigation systems, but we're talking about small man on a 1 acre, 2 acre plot doing some cash crop to support himself and his family. That we need to prioritize, Madam Speaker, so that whether it is using rainwater harvesting solutions, whether it is going back to looking at mini dams as an example, we have to put the Anthonys in a position that they can produce all year round. People, Madam Speaker, must be at the center of any good policy. Madam Speaker, the budget for the fiscal year 21-22 seeks to achieve a real GDP growth of 5.2%. At this point, this growth has to be engineered in the domestic market. And we will have growth because our GDP has fallen so much. But, Madam Speaker, we will grow more if we are able to increase our spend. On this side, Madam Speaker, we are proposing that the government increases its expenditure by the equivalent of 1% of GDP. 1% of GDP to the current budget. And based on the GDP estimates, that works out to be 21.5 billion Jamaican dollars. That can be funded if we relax our fiscal rules and look at our primary balance and look at reducing that balance, which is now projected at 6.1%, to look at bringing that down by 1%. Madam Speaker, if you look around the world at countries who are responding to this crisis, many of them are running deficits, many of them are running not surpluses. Madam Speaker, and they're doing this not because they want to be irresponsible, but because of the scale and severity of the crisis. There's a requirement to do more to support the most vulnerable in the society. When we looked at what we are spending as a percentage of GDP and what we have spent in response to the crisis, it is clear that we haven't done anywhere near enough in comparison to the countries in the Caribbean, which explains the state of our poverty, of our inequality, and food insecurity. So, Madam Speaker, we have to do more. And in order to grow, the government has to spend more. And economic growth requires expanding the revenue base and contributing more to our financing needs. So, Madam Speaker, I want to go to how we are recommending that money be spent to facilitate economic growth. First, Madam Speaker, the support to individuals and households, which we believe requires an additional $5 billion. $5 billion. And we believe there must be a special carve-out for female-headed households. I've shown where women have borne the brunt of the economic fallout from COVID. And we're using data to drive what we are recommending. And we have so many female-headed households in the country. We have to do more for those households so that we can lift people out of food poverty and get them in a position where they can contribute to economic growth. Secondly, Madam Speaker, that we allocate more money, $5 billion, for micro and small businesses. Now, I want to explain what I mean. I heard what the minister proposed on Tuesday, the establishment of an equity fund, and on this side, we have no issue with that. The establishment of other initiatives for small businesses. But if you take an equity fund, for example, the first thing to participate in an equity fund, the investor is going to ask you to bring your last 3 or 5 years of financial statements with your profit and loss and your income statement, etc. Now, Madam Speaker, that is going to rule out the vast majority of micro businesses that have been affected by this pandemic. The majority of these micro businesses, many of them are informal, they are not formally registered, they may not pay income tax, but they contribute because they buy goods, people buy from them, they do stuff which contributes to the overall economy. Those small businesses need help, and they need direct help. And Madam Speaker, I am not proposing that we just give people money just so. I believe it has to be tied to a program where they do some business development training or some financial literacy training, and that the help that they get is a condition of that. So we're saying to them, listen, you may be outside the formal system. You have never looked at your income and your expenditures properly. But we are going to support you, but tied to that support, we are going to ensure that we bring you up to a level that you can grow and sustain your businesses. The majority of our micro businesses are not going to be able to benefit from the assistance that the government has announced. And I want to come back to my first point about the support for the individuals. Last year, the government did a one-off cash payment of $10,000 under the CARE program. The reality, Madam Speaker, all of us know, $10,000 can't last long. And if we're going forward in terms of support for individuals, we have to look at extending that support over a period of time. So if it means reducing the monthly that you provide, you have to provide it over a longer period so that those persons can have that income to deal with the fallout that they have had. A one-off payment alone will not do it. Madam Speaker, for the farmers, we are proposing that an additional $3 billion of that extra funds be plowed into more buyback programs. All of us have seen over the last couple of weeks tomatoes rotting. Sometimes people feeding them to the pigs. And it's the most disheartening thing for a farmer who has spent weeks, months, and gets to a point where he has produced this crop and him not nobody to buy it. Or the price at which he sells it is below the cost of his production. We have to do more for those small farmers, Madam Speaker. And in doing more for those farmers, we have to look at what I call the small-scale irrigation programs. The small-scale irrigation programs, so that farmers don't have to worry about the dry season. And the reality with climate change, we don't know when the dry season is. But they need to be in a position where they can produce their crops all year round. Madam Speaker, for the broadband rollout, and I spoke about it before, we have already seen where what is being proposed is being cut. We are saying you have to spend more on broadband. You have to put more into a rollout program. One, to ensure that all our children have access to education, but more importantly, if we want to become the digital society that we aspire to, this becomes a requirement. So we have to spend more for broadband rollout. Madam Speaker, the digital literacy program, and I want to share what my thoughts are on this. The same community centers that the USF should be connecting to free Wi-Fi. We need to use those centers as training points for persons within the community. I've seen the reaction to one utility provider that has said it's going to close an office, and the outrage it has caused. But the reality, Madam Speaker, is that as we go forward, more and more businesses are going to close their physical locations. Those who are older in age, who are not as adept at using the technology, are going to be forced to learn it. But we can't leave them behind. Yeah. So our digital literacy program, we have to utilize these centers that are there. Some of them would have been connected by the USF, and provide training not just to the young, but to all, so that they can become digitally literate citizens in our country. We believe a provision must be provided for that. Madam Speaker, as oil prices rise, and we recognize the short-term volatility, but we expect as the global economy recovers, prices are going to continue to rise. There is going to be a negative impact on individuals in terms of the pass-through to your electricity bills. The government, while maintaining the tax for the hedge, is no longer hedging. So consumers will have to bear the brunt of this pass-through. We are saying, Madam Speaker, that we need to put in place a renewable energy and energy efficiency program for households and individuals. I know one exists for businesses, and there's a facility through DBJ. But if, for example, as a householder, I want to put in a solar system. But even if you don't want to go to that level, if I want to change out all my LED bulb, all my bulbs to LED, if I want to ensure that my roof is covered so that the heat don't come in and make me use more AC, if I want to change my ACs to the inverters, there should be a facility supported by the government that allows those persons to borrow, maybe through DBJ, through the commercial banks, so that they can implement energy-saving initiatives that can cut their light bill by up to 40%. Or NHT. But make no mistake, while none of us hope this, the upward trajectory in oil prices will lead to significant hardship with the pass-through in the cost of fuel and in electricity costs. We need to do something to ensure that Jamaicans are protected from this. Madam Speaker, our healthcare system has borne the brunt of the COVID-19 pandemic. And we have seen over the last couple of months, certainly since the beginning of the year, where we have lost healthcare workers who go abroad, frankly, because they are in demand globally. And there's nothing we can pay those nurses in comparison to what they could get if they go abroad. But, Madam Speaker, we have a lot of healthcare workers who have remained. They have remained steadfast because they love their country and they want to stay in their country. And, Madam Speaker, in these challenging times, where, quite frankly, they are putting life at risk by serving the public, we believe an incentive should be paid during the COVID time to our healthcare workers, Madam Speaker, to keep them and to keep them here. It's not going to prevent somebody from migrating, so I don't want to be misunderstood. But to deal with the pressures that they are under, the stresses that they are under, and the risks to themselves, we believe something should be provided. And not, as my colleague, Dr. Guy said, there was a commitment to provide $2,000 per day to some of these healthcare professionals. In some cases, we heard complaints that they were not even receiving that. But we're talking about providing something on top of that. And finally, Madam Speaker, we have to, as we have seen the daily rates of the COVID infections rise, as we have seen our own death rates, today 13 persons, well, yesterday, but reported today, is 12? 12 have died. And again, we offer condolences to the families of those. But the reality is that there are too many stories now of Jamaicans who can't get a hospital bed simply because we have run out of bed space. Yes, we have the field hospital, the one in Trelawney. We have the other one that was St. Joseph's in my constituency, and the one in Spanish Town. But we have already exhausted most of those in terms of the number of cases. We have to do more, Madam Speaker, to ensure that if persons get sick, there is a hospital bed for them. Madam Speaker, we recognize that overcoming this crisis is not the sole responsibility of the government. We recognize it's neither the responsibility of the private sector alone. And while the vaccines promise some hope, there is no magic bullet that will wish away the deadly effects of the coronavirus. The road to recovery, Madam Speaker, requires the collective will and effort of all Jamaicans. And on this side, we have offered our support, we have offered recommendations, we have offered our expertise. And we still will continue to do so because we recognize that what has taken place has been unprecedented on all levels. But for the sake of every Jamaican, Madam Speaker, we need to act now. We have an opportunity. The data shows that our response to COVID in relation to what has taken place in other countries was significantly lower, which has contributed to the poverty, the food insecurity, and the lack of growth. We have to do more. We have to support those individuals like Patsy, who is the vendor at the school in my constituency. And the only reason I don't name it, I don't want to identify the person because some people are sensitive. Yvonne, who shares our phone with our grandchildren. Andrew, the small farmer. We have to do more for those people. And Tony too. And Tony. Not this Andrew. But Madam Speaker, we have to do more for those individuals who are trying, who are not sitting down waiting on a handout, who want to contribute positive to their society. We have to do more for them. We need to support those businesses to keep their doors open so that we can save jobs. We have to increase the broadband rollout so that we can connect our communities and ensure that we can compete in the digital age. And we have to ensure that we build houses that the majority of Jamaicans can afford. Madam Speaker, we can do this for the sake of our people. People matter, and people must be at the center of all the policies we implement. Thank you, Madam Speaker. God bless Jamaica, and God bless you all.
Madam Speaker, we would like to thank the member for Southeast St. Andrew for this presentation, and we look forward, Madam Speaker, to the continuation of this debate in the very robust and strong fashion that the two speakers have so positioned it. Next sitting of the House, Madam Speaker, we'll see the Leader of the Opposition, the member from South St. Andrew, making his presentation on Tuesday, the 16th of March at 2 p.m. at George William Gordon's house. Madam Speaker, I therefore move that the House be adjourned and that the debate be continued on the 16th day of March 2021. May it please you, Madam Speaker.
I too want to thank the member from Southeast St. Catherine for his presentation, and to members, the question is that the House be now adjourned until next week, Tuesday, the 16th of March. And that the budget debate be suspended until the 16th of March, next week, Tuesday. Those in favor? Aye. Those against? The ayes have it. This House is now adjourned.
Watch the 2021 budget debates on PBCJ and find out how much money the government plans to spend on security, roads, water, housing, and other services. The action kicks off with Minister of Finance and the Public Service, Dr. Nigel Clarke, on March 9. Opposition spokesman on Finance, Planning and the Public Service, Mr. Julian Robinson, will speak on March 11. 16. Prime Minister Andrew Holness will address the House on March 18. And the Minister of Finance and Public Service, Dr. Nigel Clarke, will close the debate on March 23. That's the 2021 budget debates on PBCJ, the People's Station.
Jamaica and its workforce are advancing quickly. Life-changing opportunities are arising. You need training and support. We are the Renewed Heart NSTA Trust, committed to providing new and emerging skills training and opportunities. Come to Heart. We'll help you claim your place in the workforce of the future.
Celebrating Chinese culture, history, and future in music, dance, and more. PBCJ presents highlights of the 2021 Spring Festival Gala this Sunday at 9 p.m. Be sure to watch it. There's something for everyone. Watch the 2021 Spring Festival Gala right here on the People's Station, PBCJ.
Nah, click on your link for my liquor brother pre that slap bro, we no need that. And the next thing them type a song they are listening online, what kind of thing that some big man pose up on them profile and a put chat to a small child. Watch yourself on social media when you a post back sis, no do nothing too wild. What if your liquor brothers in a post, yeah? What if your bro dead in a crime video, yeah? What if your little sister fi take a one pic and it a put up everywhere like it's a poster? Before me share the post, the pic, I ask myself what if I nah comment, I nah go click me. Before me ask what if I nah comment, I nah go click me. Before me ask what if, so before you share the post, the link, just ask yourself what if, yeah. When you're there online, make it a new day at the rhyme. Keep up with the time. Broadcasting Commissioner remind you.
Jamaica, lush, beautiful tropical island.
Warm, loving, hard-working people.
Renowned international achievements.
Yet daunted by corruption, poverty, crime, and violence.
Realizing the need for better governance, transparency, and accountability in our affairs, National Integrity Action NIA was launched to combat corruption and build integrity in Jamaica.
Non-partisan, balanced, and fair, NIA has embarked on a broad program to help build a movement for integrity.
Persistently pushing Parliament to pass crucial anti-corruption laws.
Training public officials, working in communities among students and the youth. The Governor General's I Believe program.
NIA is expanding, now a membership organization.
Jamaica can curb corruption, but more hands are needed. Join NIA today. Let us together make Jamaica the place of choice to live, to work, to raise families, and to do business.
When our visitors come to Jamaica, they're not just here for the sun and the sand, they're here for food. And what better way than to have one of our sauces? Tricam Processors Limited manufactures sauces, condiments, everything Jamaican. These are made by hand by myself and my team. The fact that I am now a part of an industry where people can get that experience, it's an amazing feeling. We are proud to be a part of a country, a sector that allows our visitors to bring a part of us home. Tourism is working for Tricam Processors Limited. Tourism can work for you.
What if they knew that you abused her? Her family?
Mr. Jones.
And your colleagues, how will they look at an abuser? When the law comes knocking, you'll have nowhere to run.
Mr. Brown, you're under arrest. Please get up, hands behind your head and interlock your fingers.
Turn your back on abusers. Report gender-based violence to the police. There's no excuse for abuse. Call the Bureau of Gender Affairs at 876-754-8577.
Deep in the forest, far away from everywhere. With a bunch of mighty little critters, they're called the Pawpaw Bears. These are brave and fearless pawpaws, as everyone well knows. When you get in trouble, and this goes double, you call the Pawpaw Bear.
Pawpaw Bears! Pawpaw Bears! Pawpaw Bears!
These pawpaws pop up all around like magic. They're there. The troubles that you thought you had have vanished in the air. So don't forget those pawpaws. They'll come from everywhere. If you get in trouble, and this goes double, you call the Pawpaw Bears.
Pawpaw Bears! Pawpaw Bears! Pawpaw Bears!
The snow sure makes the forest look beautiful.
Right, Princess. It's a lovely day. But I'm not sure those rabbits would agree.
My, they do look cold. What's he signaling?
He's saying, send food. We're hungry.
They must be starving and cold.
We'll be back with food. Take care.
Good. Our little forest friends must be taken care of.
Well, it's up to us.
Oops! Watch out!
Coming through.
There's enough frozen food here to feed an army.
This is for the animals, Trembly. The army'll have to wait.
Army is just an expression.
I know that.
An errand of mercy. Food for our less fortunate friends.
Food for our less fortunate friends. What did you say?
I didn't say anything. It was my stomach growling.
I heard it. It said, why doesn't Darkbook get us some food?
That must have been my stomach, because I sure wouldn't have said that.
Well, eat this, you stomach stuffers.
Maybe we could disguise ourselves as snowmen and steal their food.
I've got a better idea. We'll disguise ourselves as snowmen and steal their food.
Gee, you get all the great ideas.
I do. I do.
On behalf of all the pawpaws, I, Trembly Paw, would like to present to you the cold, the hungry, and the needy animals of the forest.